السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the book of al-Murbi, and hopefully inshallah ta'ala we can finish what's in this chapter of Sujood al-Sahw. But before we go to the next chapter, I want to make sure inshallah ta'ala that as a homework inshallah that you review the entire chapter of Sujood al-Sahw. And you go word by word and to make sure that everything is understood and everything is clear with both the متن of Zad al-Mustaqni and al-Murbi inshallah ta'ala, and we can make sure that we have it done right inshallah. Barakallah fikum. We continue inshallah. He says here in page 300 وسجود السهو لما أي لفعل شيء أو تركه يبطل الصلاة عمده أي تعمده. Now this is a mas'ala that talks about the principle that governs the understanding of sujood al-sahw. When sujood al-sahw becomes mandatory, what's the thing that is common in all of these masail? He says وسجود السهو لما sujood al-sahw for doing something or leaving something. So because we said sujood al-sahw or al-sahw in the salah is in doing something more, increasing something in the salah, adding something to the salah, or taking something out of the salah, making it less, or a shak or the doubt. So the sujood of al-sahw, because you did something more or you left something, يبطل الصلاة عمده. If intentionally عمده invalidates the salah, like if a person intentionally missed the ruku', if he's intentionally, knowingly, he just skipped the ruku', what is the ruling of the salah? Salah is batila, is not valid. So this is basically what this principle is. If you want to know that it's mandatory or not to make sujood al-sahw, look at that thing that a person missed. If he missed it intentionally, his salah is invalid. Therefore, if he missed it unintentionally, that means out of forgetfulness, then we go by the rulings. That means if it's rukn, you have to do the rukn. If it's wajib, you don't have to. But the ruling here that he has to make sujood al-sahw. He has to do sujood al-sahw. So this is the way to understand it, and you can relate the different masail to this. Whatever is missed in the salah, whatever a person did increase in the salah, if he did that amdan, intentionally, what's the hukm? The salah becomes invalid. Therefore, if he did it out of forgetfulness, the salah is valid, but sujood al-sahw becomes mandatory upon him. Clear? So that's why when he says وَسُجُودُ السَّهْوِ لِمَا أي لِفِعْلِ شَيْءٍ أو تَرْكِ, which means lima here, for anything that he did or left. يُبْطِلُ الصَّلَاةَ عَمْدُهُ. يُبْطِلُ from al-butlan, that means invalidates. الصَّلَاةَ مفعول به مقدم here. Right? Because the says يُبْطِلُ عَمْدُهُ. That means عَمْدُهُ is if a person did it intentionally, then invalidates the salah. So يبطل, as if he's saying يبطل عمده الصلاة. Right? يبطل عمده أي تعمده, meaning for him to do it intentionally, that invalidates the salah. So as a result of that, he mentioned here a mas'ala that has some differences of opinions. That's why he mentioned it. He says ومنه اللحن المحيل للمعنى سهوا أو جهلا. Pay attention, inshallah ta'ala, because here the words are very precise. From that meaning, what has just been mentioned here, اللحن المحيل للمعنى. اللحن is the mistake in the recitation. So this is what اللحن means. So when something that is called اللحن, even when the recitation of the Quran, you have اللحن الجلي واللحن الخفي. You have لحن خفي, اللحن جلي. اللحن الجلي is the major mistake in the recitation of the Quran that changes the meaning. Versus the اللحن الخفي, or the hidden mistake that doesn't make does not change the meaning of the ayat. So what he's saying here, which is basically the obvious versus the, something that is hidden. So he says here, اللحن المحيل للمعنى الجلي. That means if a person makes a mistake, error in the recitation of the Quran, that the meaning is changed. المحيل, أحالة, that means it becomes something else. The meaning of the ayah becomes something else, opposite to what the ayah means. Whether it's sahwan أو jahlan, whether it's out of forgetfulness or jahlan, not knowing the rulings, not knowing what he's saying. So according to this here, then sujood al-sahw is wajibun in this case. He says wajib. From that is al-lahn al-muhid al-ma'na. Sahwan, this is clear. So, okay, if someone makes a major mistake in the recitation of the Quran, other than Surah Al-Fatiha also, not just Surah Al-Fatiha. So if someone says, for example, صراط الذين أنعمت with a dhamma on the ta, that means he's saying, guide us to the straight path, the path that I, meaning the musalli, the human being, bestowed upon the people. Of course, this is a completely different meaning here. And of course, it's such an evil meaning, but the person did it out of forgetfulness, or whether a person did it intentionally, which is وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ بِكُفْرٍ, or he did it sahwan, out of forgetfulness, or jahlan, he doesn't know the ruling, just learning how to recite. So he made it out of ignorance. If it's sahwan, he knows the correct recitation and he did it out of forgetfulness, and the meaning completely changed, then according to this is that he has to make sujood al-sahw because the meaning changed. The meaning changed. Whether it's Surah Al-Fatiha or other than Surah Al-Fatiha. If it's jahlan, if it's out of ignorance, he says here also wajib. But the ulama, they say if it's jahl, there's no sujood sahw on him. Someone doesn't, this is the best that he can do when it comes to recitation of the Quran. And Sheikh Ibn Baz and others, when they mentioned this, they said al-jahl, it's does not make sujood sahw mandatory upon him. Because anyway, if he doesn't know what he's saying, if this is what the best he can in reciting the ayat of the Quran, how would he know to make sujood sahw or not? Unless someone, of course, corrects him. But if it's out of ignorance, then if it's the salah is valid for him because this is what the best he can do, then it's also valid for others. But there has a difference of opinion here. So I just want to understand this. First of all, the principle, anything that a person would do in the salah intentionally invalidates the salah. It means if he did it out of forgetfulness, it requires sujood al-sahw. And this example of al-lahn al-muhil, which shows again the importance of making sure that we recite the Quran properly. And the mistakes are valid to happen, of course. But if it's a mistake that doesn't change the meaning, does not change the meaning, then the salah is valid. There's no need even for sujood al-sahw. He still made a mistake in recitation. But what's mentioned here is the recitation of the Quran that changes the meaning. And sometimes the meaning is changed because of tashkil, a vowel. Dhamma instead of fatha or vice versa makes the fa'il maf'ul, maf'ul fa'il. That changes the meaning completely. So this is where is meant by here that sujood al-sahw becomes wajib in this case. Why is that? He said لِفِعْلِهِ عليه الصلاة والسلام, because the action of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, which is whenever the cases that the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام made sujood sahw, missing a rukn, missing a rak'ah like this, that means out of forgetfulness. وَأَمْرِهِ بِهِ فِي غَيْرِ حَدِيث, and the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام commanded for people to make sujood sahw in more than one hadith. وَالْأَمْرُ لِلْوُجُوب, and the command is for the wujub because it's mandatory then. So it becomes an obligatory thing. Sujood al-sahw itself is wajib. Sujood al-sahw itself is wajib. And as it's going to be mentioned here, and therefore, if someone knows that he made a mistake in the salah, and intentionally he did not make sujood al-sahw, then his salah is invalid. Because sujood al-sahw is wajib for him. But if he forgot sujood al-sahw, then this will be discussed afterwards, inshallah, which means it does not invalidate the salah. So he says, وَمَا لَا يُبْطِلُ عَمْدُهُ كترك السنن وما لا. Now in the case of the amd of it, intentionally you missed something, intentionally you did something in the salah, but the salah does not become invalid in this case. Like what? Like كترك السنن, like when you leave some of the recommended acts in the salah. وزيادة قول مشروع, and to increase something, a speech, a statement that is مشروع, part of the deen, part of the dhikr, part of what's to be said in the salah, but غير السلام, other than the salam, of course, because if a person says salam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah during the salah, that takes him out of the salah. So if he added any valid statement, but في غير موضعه, not in its position, be careful, this is different than what we had mentioned before. This is not having a قول مشروع في غير موضعه. When you make something in the place of something else, instead of saying Subhana Rabbiyal Azim in ruku', you said Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. That's different than what is being mentioned here, right? Has been mentioned before. This has sujood sahw. You have to make sujood sahw for that one. But here ziyada, the word ziyada means he added something. That is mashru', a valid statement, a valid part of what he said, and it's other than the salam, but not in its position. So say, for example, someone in ruku' said Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, which is perfect in its position, and then he added to it Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. This is what is meant here. He increased after he did what he's was supposed to do. He added something that is not in its place. So in this case, what? لا يجب له السجود. This is not mandatory for him to make sujood. لا يجب له السجود بل يسن في الثاني. بل يسن في الثاني, that means it's recommended in the second case, which have been talked about before, right? Which is replacing وما لا يبطل عمده كترك السنن وزيادة قول مشروع يسن. That means it's recommended only, not something that is mandatory for the person to do so. Right? So وما لا يبطل عمده كترك السنن وزيادة قول مشروع غير السلام في غير موضعه لا يجب له السجود بل يسن في الثاني. It's only recommended in the second case here as mentioned here. So hopefully this is clear, inshallah. All of that is because of this principle. Whatever is missed, if it's intentional, it invalidates the salah. Then if it's missed out of forgetfulness, then it's sujood al-sahw here is mandatory. But if the salah if a person misses something intentionally and it does not invalidate the salah, then either sujood al-sahw becomes permissible or recommended. Now, then he says, وَتَبْطُلُ الصَّلَاةُ بِتَعَمُّدِ تَرْكِ سُجُودِ سَهْوٍ وَاجِبٍ. Now here, تَبْطُل. The salah becomes invalid بِتَعَمُّدِ تَرْكِ سُجُودِ سَهْوٍ وَاجِبٍ. If he intentionally missed sujood sahw, that is wajib, that is obligatory. So he knows that sujood sahw is obligatory upon him because he missed something, and he intentionally missed it. Then his salah is invalid because he missed a wajib. And the rule here, if you miss a wajib intentionally, that invalidates the salah. But then he says, أفضليته قبل السلام فقط. Not all of the sujood of al-sahw. Only the sujood of al-sahw, that it's better to be done before the salam. Because as we know, sujood al-sahw can be done either before the salam or after the salam. And according to the madhab and according to the opinion that is based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that since the Prophet ﷺ did sujood al-sahw sometimes before the salam, and in other cases after the salam, so they say it's better to do sujood al-sahw before the salam, before you make salam, after tashahhud and before salam, if forgetfulness in the salah because of missing something in the salah. But if the sahw is in increasing something in the salah, then it's better to do it after the salam, if it's increasing something in the salah. So if a person did not make sujood al-sahw intentionally, but that sujood al-sahw, it's best to be done before the salam. As he says, أفضليته قبل السلام فقط. It's recommended to be done before the salam only. So in this case, فلا تبطل بتعمد ترك سجود مسنون ولا واجب محل أفضليته بعد السلام. So the salah is not invalid if a person intentionally left sujood of a sahwa that is masnoon, that is recommended, as mentioned previously in some of these cases. A person intentionally did not make sujood sahwa for something recommended because he left something recommended, then the salah is valid. Or ولا واجب محل أفضليته بعد السلام. If sujood sahwa was mandatory upon him, but it's best to be done after the salam because he made an increase in the salah. So he said the salam and he's supposed to make two sujood and then another salam, right? He missed that sujood al-sahw because it's supposed to be done after the salam. After the salam, we say, as what's mentioned here, it does not invalidate the salah. They looked at it as it's going to be mentioned because as if he finished the salah. But since the sujood sahwa was supposed to be before the salam, they looked at it as if he's still in the salah. So to miss it intentionally, that invalidates the salah. But since he made the first salam, so that means if he misses it afterwards, that does not invalidate his salah, that it's already finished with the salam. That's why he says, وَهُوَ مَا إِذَا سَلَّمَ قَبْلَ إِتْمَامِهَا. If he made salam before the finishing of the salah. لأنه خارج عنها, because this is something that is outside of the salah. فلم يؤثر في إبطالها, so it did not affect the invalidation of the salah. Right? So this is basically the butlan of the salah, or the salah becomes invalid if a person intentionally missed sujood al-sahw. If sujood al-sahw was mandatory upon him and intentionally he missed it, that invalidates the salah. But only the sujood al-sahw that is to be done before the salam. If it's to be done after the salam and he missed it intentionally, that does not invalidate the salah. Why? Because لأنه خارج عنها, because this is outside of the salah. Now, so this is with regard to missing sujood al-sahw intentionally. If a person misses sujood al-sahw out of forgetfulness, then there is nothing on him. If he remembers right after the salah, he makes it. But if he did not remember it, as it's going to be mentioned, then the salah is valid, whether it's before or after, which is the ruling of missing a wajib, because he missed a wajib. He says, وَعُلِمَ مِنْ قَوْلِهِ أَفْضَلِيَّتُهُ. Ulim in the passive tense, then we got to know then from his statement أَفْضَلِيَّتُهُ, because if in that says وَتَبْطُلُ بِتَرْكِ سُجُودِ بترك سجود أفضليته قبل السلام فقط. It only becomes invalid the salah if a person misses sujood al-sahw, the sujood al-sahw that it's best to be done before the salam. So since he said أفضليته, that it's best to do it before the salam, because as it's known, if a person does it before or after the salam, sujood al-sahw, the salah is good, is valid to do it either way. So therefore he says وعلم من قوله أفضليته, that he said أفضليته, that the best for it to be done أن كونه قبل السلام أو بعده ندب. That means to make sujood السهو before the salam or after the salam ندب, مستحب, لورود الأحاديث بكل من الأمرين, because the hadith came in both cases here. So that's what أفضليته, the significance of saying أفضليته. So وتبطل الصلاة بتعمد ترك سجود سهو واجب أفضليته قبل السلام فقط. فهنا القول ببطلان الصلاة لمن تعمد ترك سجود السهو الذي يكون قبل السلام. أما إذا تعمد ترك سجود السهو الذي يكون بعد السلام فصلاته صحيحة. وفي كل الأمرين قد تعمد ترك سجود السهو. I'm just saying that again in Arabic to make it clear, inshallah. So hopefully this is clear. So وتبطل الصلاة بتعمد ترك سجود سهو واجب أفضليته قبل السلام فقط، فلا تبطل بتعمد ترك سجود مسنون. If it's recommended سجود, then the salah of course is not invalid. ولا واجب محل أفضليته بعد السلام. And also the second case, that the wajib was supposed to be done after the salam, وهو ما إذا سلم قبل إتمامه لأنه خارج عنها فلم يؤثر في إبطالها. وعلم من قوله أفضليته أن كونه قبل السلام أو بعده ندب. As a result of that, that means you make sujood al-sahw before or after the salam. This is recommended لورود الأحاديث بكل من الأمرين. Now he says, وَإِن نَسِيَهُ, if he forgets it. Forgets what? أي نسي سجود السهو الذي محله قبل السلام. If he forgot sujood al-sahw, then its place is before the salam, where we said intentionally that invalidates the salah, because he missed something wajib intentionally. So if he forgets it, وسلم, and he made salam, ثم ذكر, then he remembered, سجد وجوبا, that means he has to make sujood as a wajib, as a mandatory thing, as something mandatory upon him. سجد وجوبا إن قرب زمنه, with the condition that the time of it is very near, as mentioned before also with everything else. وإن شرع في صلاة أخرى فإذا سلم وإن شرع في صلاة أخرى فإذا سلم وإن طال فصل عرفا أو أحدث أو خرج من المسجد لم يسجد وصحت صلاته. So this is إن قرب زمنه, if the time is near. But if he شرع, he started another salah, right? Also if he made salam, if he made salam and after making the salam وطال فصل عرفا, and the fasl, or the separation between the salam and the time that he remembered is a long time, عرفا, by the urf, how it's to be seen, أو أحدث, or he broke his wudu, or he خرج من المسجد, or he left from, went out of the masjid, لم يسجد, he is not to make sujood in this case, وصحت صلاته, and his salah becomes valid. But before here he says وإن شرع في صلاة أخرى فإذا سلم. That means if he remembers after he finished the salah and he was supposed to make sujood sahw and he forgot, and he started another salah immediately, and after the salam he should make sujood. But then if the time is, and they say that this is within the closeness of the time, that the time is still close. But if the time is long or he broke his wudu, some said even if he broke his wudu, he comes back and do it because he missed it and it's wajib on him. أو خرج من المسجد, that means, again, this is all examples of بعد الزمان. That means the time is prolonged and he remembered after a long period of time that he was supposed to make sujood al-sahw. Because if he missed a rukn, even if it's after 10 years, if he missed the pillar of the salah, it doesn't matter how long he remembers. If he remembers, then he has to make that rukn. But if it's after a long period of time, then the entire salah has to be done again. So hopefully this is clear, inshallah. So this is if he forgets to do sahw, which it's placed before the salam. And then he remembers it, then he has to make sujood as a mandatory thing if the time is near. If it's after the salam, then he forgot it, then it's okay. And the salah is valid, does not have to do it again. It's not mandatory upon him to do it. If it's the sujood is after the salam. He says, وَمَنْ سَهَى فِي صَلَاةٍ, and according to the madhab, as we said, the case where the sujood of as-sahw is to be done after the salam, if a person increased something in the salah. This is where it's best to be done. He says, وَمَنْ سَهَى فِي صَلَاةٍ مِرَارًا كَفَاهُ لِجَمِيعِ سَهْوِهِ سَجْدَتَانِ. Now the mas'ala here is if someone saha, forgot in the salah miraran, more than one sahw, miraran, one after the other. He made more than one sahw. For example, in the first rak'ah, he missed a sajda. So then he's in the second rak'ah. So he would not recognize the first rak'ah, and he add a rak'ah at the end, as we talked about it before, and he has to make sujood sahw. And then now he's continuing the salah, then he missed the tashahhud. Right? He's making salah. In the second rak'ah, he remembered that he missed a sujood in the first rak'ah. That invalidates the first rak'ah. So you would have to add a rak'ah at the end, and he's supposed to make sujood sahw. And within the same salah, he missed the tashahhud, the first tashahhud. And he stood up and he started reciting the Quran in the third rak'ah. And of course, in this case, he does not have to go back. It's not valid for him to go back and sit and make tashahhud al-awsat, and becomes mandatory for him to make sujood al-sahw. So now two sahw. Does he make two sujood sahw, two rak'ah, two sajda? No. He says ومن سهى في صلاة مرارا many times كفاه suffice for him لجميع سهوه to all of his سهو all of his forgetfulness سجدتان two سجدة only ولو اختلف محل السجود even if it's محل the time to make the sujood is different if it's for naqs he missed something so it's best to do it before the salam and another sahw increasing he stood up for a fifth rak'ah out of forgetfulness so it's best to be done after the salam so in the same salah he had more than one sahw one is recommended to be done before the salam and one sahw to be done after the salam still he has only one sujood sahw to do which is two sajda only ويغلب ما قبل السلام لسبقه so should he do it then before the salam or after the salam do it before the salam ويغلب الغلبة is to defeat is to overcome so that means he would take the sujood before the salam more why لسبقه because it comes first right so this is and if he does it before or after that's fine but it's best to do it before the salam in this case hopefully this is clear so more than one sahw in the salah only what's sufficient is two sajda of a sahw not more than that then he says وسجود السهو وما يقال فيه وفي الرفع منه كسجود صلب الصلاة سجود السهو and what's said in it and in raising from it is like the sujood in صلب الصلاة in the salah itself and a صلب is the core of the salah is the original salah that means the sujood al-sahw you treat it like the normal sujood of the salah وما يقال فيه so you say in sujood al-sahw what you say in the normal sujood سبحان ربي الأعلى سبحان ربي الأعلى سبحان ربي الأعلى like this any dua in the sujood is to be also said in sujood al-sahw وفي الرفع منه and coming up from it you say Allahu Akbar the same thing when you go for sujood al-sahw Allahu Akbar you come up you say Allahu Akbar like you would do in the sujood in the salah كسجود صلب الصلاة as exactly the sujood in the salah itself but now he says فإن سجد قبل السلام أتى به بعد فراغه من التشهد if he makes sujood before the salam then he would make the sujood of a sahw after he finishes from the tashahud not before the tashahud of course so if the sujood al-sahw to be done before the salam he would أتى به به refers to sujood al-sahw بعد فراغي after he finishes from the tashahud so he finished the tashahud and the dua after the tashahud and before he makes salam he says Allahu Akbar make one sajda Allahu Akbar he sits says رب اغفر لي رب اغفر لي make say Allahu Akbar do another sajda and then say Allahu Akbar and he sits وسلم عقبه and he makes salam after it and he already did the tashahud and he's done and then now here he says وإن أتى به بعد السلام if he made the sujood al-sahw after the salam the sujood al-sahw after the salam you finish the tashahud the dua you say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah then you make two sajda of al-sahw this is بعد السلام he says here جلس بعده مفترسا في ثنائية ومتوركا في غيرها how to sit after you make sujood al-sahw after if the sujood al-sahw is after the salam clear you would sit مفترشا if it's two rak'ah the two rak'ah جلسة is الافتراش where you sit on your left foot and you erect the right foot this is الافتراش so you sit back in the same position and you make salam ومتوركا في غيرها التورك is if it's 3 rak'ah or 4 rak'ah the last tashahud you sit جلسة التورك where you the buttocks of the left one you sit on the ground and the left foot is under the right thigh and you erect the right foot as we know the جلسة التورك so if it's a 4 rak'ah salah after you make sujood sahw you sit the جلسة of التورك so the way that you were sitting before sujood sahw you sit the same way after sujood sahw متوركا في غيره now he mentioned here which has differences of opinion whether to make tashahhud after sujood al-sahw which is done after the salam or not he says وتشهد وجوبا التشهد الأخير. According to what's mentioned here in the madhab, is that he makes another tashahud after the two sajda of as-sahw if it's done after the salam. So again, he would say salam, then say Allahu Akbar, make sujood, Allahu Akbar, sit, Allahu Akbar, he makes sujood, Allahu Akbar, and he sits, and he makes tashahud again, and then he makes salam. This is what is mentioned here. This is what is said. But the other opinion, which is again which is another narration and what the ulama are upon, and is not to make another tashahud. Is not to make another tashahud. The tashahud that is before the salam is sufficient. The reason why, and before we continue, the reason why they said tashahud, another tashahud, is there's a hadith, but the hadith is weak. The hadith is weak, and it has two narrations. The narration in Sahih Muslim does not say tashahud. So that means the other one, the other narration, which is weak, talks about tashahud again. But it's a weak narration. And the authentic narration of the same hadith in Sahih Muslim does not mention another tashahud after the two sajda of as-sahw that is done after the salam. So, and this is wallahu a'lam, is the correct opinion, is not to make another tashahud. وتشهد وجوبا التشهد الأخير ثم سلم, then he makes salam لأنه في حكم مستقل في نفسه, as he says, because he's now in the ruling of al-Mustaqni. It's a separate thing in itself. Because he finished the salah, finished the tashahud, and then he makes sujood, and they looked at it also from the perspective that you made sujood. So usually after sujood, you have a tashahud. You don't make salam after sujood. You would have a tashahud afterwards. So again, this is a valid difference of opinion, but again, as mentioned, is to make just salam after the second, after the two sajda of as-sahw, if it's done after the salam. That's the end of the chapter of sujood. Hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, it's clear, but to make sure that we did not miss anything, review it, inshallah, and before we go to the next chapter, we want to make sure that everything is clear, inshallah, in these masail, and everything is referred back to its meanings. Right? So, any questions, inshallah? First of all, the attendance code is sujood as-sahw. حكم كلمة الاستغفار بين سجدتي السهو. نعم, that's to be said. To say رب اغفر لي, رب اغفر لي. As mentioned, you say كلمة الاستغفار, you say رب اغفر لي between the two sajda of السهو. He says أتى به بعد فراغه من التشهد. Does the tashahud here includes the salawat? Yes. The tashahud here, yes, even though it did not mention the salawat, but is to include the salawat, of course. من باب التغليب يعني. What's the meaning of mustaqil? Mustaqil is separate, is independent. So when he mentioned here that since the salam is done, and then the person is making the two sajda of as-sahw after the salam, now as if now this is a separate thing in itself. It's not dependent on what has been done before the salam. So since this is a separate sujood, and since there's always tashahud after the sujood if you want to finish the salah, so they said them to make tashahud afterwards. Al-istiqlal is to be independent. Something has nothing to do with anything else. So again, as I repeat this many times, but unlike other ways of studying things, I want everybody, inshallah ta'ala, as we said, read the chapter very carefully with every sentence in it, and come up with cases where you don't understand where is being said, and how that related to what this dhamir refers to, and things of that nature. So you have page 300. On page 300, it says, فَإِنْ قَامَ بَعْدَ سَلَامِ إِمَامِهِ رَجَعَ فَسَجَدَ مَعَهُ مَا لَمْ يَسْتَتِمَّ قَائِمًا. Till the end. Here doesn't mean that it invalidates the salah. Okay, so here the statement, فَإِنْ قَامَ بَعْدَ سَلَامِ إِمَامِهِ رَجَعَ فَسَجَدَ مَعَهُ. Now this is the case where, if you remember, that the imam made a sahw. The imam made a mistake. And the masbuq now, the one that is joined the salah with the imam made salam, and the ma'mum is getting up to make up whatever is missed in the salah. If the imam made sujood al-sahw, now this is the case. The imam said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. The ma'mum, being late, he doesn't know that the imam made sahw, so he stood up. He's getting up now to make up the rak'ah that he missed or so. While he's getting up, if he sees the imam said Allahu Akbar and he made sujood, then he has to go down again with him and make sujood with him. ما لم يستتم قائما. If he stood up, completely stood up, then it's makruh to him to go back. Or if he start reciting, he stood up and he start reciting, then it's haram for him to go back to make the sujood with the imam. And in this case, he would make his own sujood after he finish. So what invalidates the salah, if he knows, this is only in the case that he stood up, the ma'mum stood up, and he start reciting the Quran in the rak'ah that he missed. If he sits down knowingly, then that invalidates the salah, knowingly. But if he does not know the ruling, or he sat down out of forgetfulness, just a reaction to what the imam did, then the salah is valid. So in the last case, which is أو يشرع في القراءة فيحرم, haram for him to go back. As mentioned also in the case where not even as a masbuq, not even as someone that is late for the salah, it's not permissible for him to go back again, as if a person start reciting the Quran. The imam even. If the imam missed the first tashahhud and he stood up and he started reciting the Quran of the third rak'ah and people reminding him that he missed, it is haram for him to sit down. And if he sits, for the tashahhud that he missed, invalidates the salah. Unless he did that out of not knowing the ruling or out of forgetfulness, he sat down, then the salah is valid. So hopefully this is clear, inshallah. ربنا يبارك فيك إن شاء الله. آمين. In the madhab, we say salam twice and then perform sujood. In madhab Abu Hanifa, they say one salam and makes tashahhud. So I want to be clear that we say salam twice with the extra added to the salah. Yes, we make salam. Every time you say as-salam, there's no case, unless it's salatul janazah, unless it refers to the two salams. There's no one salam. It's two salam. No. And there's no evidence that it's one salam whatsoever before in the sujood. Wallahu. Also in page 300 it says, وَلِسَهْوِهِ مَعَ إِمَامِهِ. Can you explain this, how this would happen? Is this referring when ma'mum is only with the imam? نعم. ويسجد مسبوق سلم معه سهوا ولسهوه مع إمامه أو في من فرد به. Right? This is different than the case where the ma'mum is alone. But here, the masbuq, the one that came late for the salah, يسجد, the masbuq made sujood, سلم معه سهوا. He made salam with the imam sahwan. If he made salam with the imam out of forgetfulness. وَلِسَهْوِهِ مَعَ إِمَامِهِ. Right? If the masbuq made salam with the imam out of forgetfulness, or he made sahw with his imam. So whether he is alone, or في من فرض به, or if he's alone, meaning finishing up the salah, this is obvious. And also the masbuq misses something with the imam while the imam was in salah. The case when the ma'mum entered the salah in the third rak'ah, so in the fourth rak'ah, and the imam stood up for the fifth rak'ah. The ma'mum doesn't know, right? But the imam is making sahw. So the masbuq here in this case would make sujood with the imam, and that fifth rak'ah does not count for the masbuq, for the one that came for the salah. So this sahw was while he is with his imam. The other case is that the masbuq entered the salah when the imam made a sahw before the masbuq entered the salah. So the masbuq entered the salah in the fourth rak'ah, and the imam missed the first tashahhud. The ma'mum was not there yet. So does the masbuq has to make sujood with the imam still? Yes, he has to. So these two cases, and أو في من فرض به, or if the مأموم was alone, مسبوق, when he stood up to make whatever is missed, if he makes sahw, of course he has to make sujood sahw in this case. So the question how this would happen, is this referring when ma'mum is, no, it's not, it doesn't have to be only with the imam. This is the masbuk in general, even if it's without the imam. With the imam, the case where only one ma'mum with the imam, then it's the ma'mum, if he has doubt, then he has to make sujood sahw, because it's only his opinion versus the imam's opinion. Is it valid to pray behind someone who gives one salam before the sajda sahw? Yes, it's valid. With these valid differences of the imam or the four imams in the salah, if someone follows one of these madahib, salah is valid, of course. No one ever said that the salah is invalid. The imam follows that, then to follow the imam even, not to do something different than what the imam does. And that's a case where, subhanAllah, when you are in the salah, you follow the imam. Because إنما جعل الإمام ليؤتم به. Even if the imam takes another opinion or even a weaker opinion or whatever, as long as it's valid within the madhahib of the Muslimin. But if the imam did something after the salah, like making bid'ah after the salah, for example, whatever, of course you don't follow that. You don't say, I have to follow the imam. You don't follow that, of course. How would someone know that they are praying the fifth rak'ah? They prayed the sahw after salam, if the fifth is not valid. If he doesn't know, then they don't know. But if they've been told, or the person, whether the fifth rak'ah is increased in the salah, and someone told him, then to make sujood sahw. If a person is in doubt whether this is 4 or 5, that means he's making it 4, and that's fine. And there's no sahw in this, there's no sujood in this case. But if he's in doubt whether it's the third or fourth, so it's the increase, that means he stood up for the fifth rak'ah, whether someone made him aware of it or not, and he thought that this is the fourth rak'ah, then he won't act basically because he thinks that it's the fourth rak'ah. They prayed the sahw after the salam, or the fifth is not valid. Yes, they would make the sahw here after the salam if he realized that he added a rak'ah in the salam. Hopefully it's clear, inshallah. And that's why, again, still, inshallah, make sure that when you're reading, and one of the things that we learned from fiqh is that you don't skip a word. You don't think that it's just written like that for just adding some words there for clarification. No, every word is meant to be that's this way. In this chapter of Sujood Sahw, many of the confusion comes in place because people don't pay attention to what a word that he said. The word ziyada, for example, increasing, the word shak, the word doubt. There's major difference between increasing or doubt. So things like this. So to make sure that everything is clear, inshallah. طيب بارك الله فيكم. We'll stop here, inshallah. And we continue next time. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.